Casual Magic has been sponsored by Quiver, maker of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine deck holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their website for 10% off your order. We're also sponsored by Architect, the premier site for hosting your decks on the internet. I love them and they love me, and it seems like a good reason for you to use them. You can also support Casual Magic directly by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ShivamB. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Architect and Quiver Time and by my patrons at patreon.com/ShivamB. Today, I'm really excited to have one of the best pro players of the past decade or so, and just like an incredibly clever, I don't know, like theorist. And I don't know how to describe you, but I just like watching you play a lot. I have Eduardo Sajgalik with me. I really should have asked how to pronounce your name before I got going, but that's okay. And I'm super stoked because we got to meet up in Amsterdam briefly after the Magic Con, and I was like, holy crap, I've been a fan of yours for a very long time. I would love to have a conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. I think your words on me as a player are probably too kind, but I consider myself as a theorist player. Not quite, but yeah, I try.
I mean, you're better than a lot of the people who listen. That's for sure. And some of my former guests have accused me of fluffing up my guests and making them too hyped for themselves. But it's a fun show. It's fine. But what I'm curious about is, man, see, this is what happens when I had a thought and then I stall out and I'm like, got to start over. But I'm not going to start the whole show over. What I'm talking about is I've watched you as a player for a long time, but the things I've heard from other players mainly has been a lot of that you are incredibly good at explaining things in like team meetings in pro tour tier of like helping people understand how formats work or anything. And I just wanted to sit down and explore with you a little bit about like, how do you approach Magic? How do you take these, like the fact that we get a discrete set of like 350 cards every couple of months and break it down in a way that a pro can actually approach it and, I don't know, win with that? Like,
sure. So one of I mean, there's a lot there. I guess I'll give current context rather than too much on background. Quickly, like I did commentary, right? So that's a skill set that does transfer, right? Because you learn how to communicate complex, especially in the expert seat, complex topics in ways that any person can understand. And that is something that did transfer actually on the more recent, because I'd say like 2016, 17, 18 was more my heyday as a pro player.
Yeah.
And more recently, I joined a team called Worldly Council, led by Zen Takahashi, who I have a lot of respect for. Wanted to get a lot of these kind of players from across the world that were winning their RCs and not finding a home. And so you have a lot of people who are hungry, want to do well, but don't really have context. Their level in, say, limited is extremely variable. I've seen players that are extremely good, others that are not. And I'm not going to name names.
No.
But the big thing, and it's interesting when you say, like, how do you teach pro players on this? But it's actually the approach I take is, how do I make sure that no matter what somebody's skill level on the team is, presuming, of course, that they have at least some competency, right? They understand fundamentals, what's going on, is how do I teach somebody who's having trouble and struggling really to be at the next level, right? Which I would consider to be, you're ready to draft on day 2 of the Pro Tour. And because if you do well in your first draft, the way tiebreakers work at the Pro Tour is you're going to face the players who did better in limited. So your second draft is usually a lot harder as a result. Whereas if you did poorly in the first draft, you would face weaker players by default on average, right? So the thing I consider is, okay, and I want to help players no matter what their caliber is, because I'm relatively reassured that players who are good will do well. But the problem is more, I approach it from, how does the player who's struggling the most, having the most trouble, but is willing to learn how to transform that?
And like, to an extent, the players you're talking about have like a floor of playability. They're not just like beginners. These are people who are obviously very, very skilled at Magic. So it's interesting to me to just hear the idea of like, being even at that tier of like RCs and Pro Tours and stuff, and still being like, oh man, you're super bad at limited. When like it's like, what does bad at limited mean when you're at that kind of level already, right?
Yeah, it's maybe a bit harsh. I when I mean good and bad, it's like relative to what you're trying to accomplish and
Mm,
relative to the skill level you're sitting at, right?
sure.
I think that one of the things I like a lot in the terms of honesty in the approach is what are your goals?
Mm,
If your goal is to just have fun and go with it, I don't have a particular issue. But if somebody comes to me and says, I want to do the best I can, whatever the format is, then I'm like, okay, well, that means you need to, considering you're putting in the time and effort, that means that, okay, but now we're going to go down a different rabbit hole.
mm,
It's okay. You just want to like take this rare, have fun with it at your local draft. That's fine, no problem. I have actually a lot of respect for you because you're doing what you should be doing, which is enjoying what you enjoy. But if what you enjoy is playing Magic at a high level, then we're having a different conversation because
right.
it's no longer just about playing the game. It's about understanding the fundamentals at a much higher level than the rest of the competition. And because
Right.
people are coming from across the world, you have to communicate that across in a way that sometimes breaks language barriers and culture barriers too.
Hmm. Yeah, because I mean, that's part of a lot. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to talk to you in the first place, because there is an art form to understanding Magic at that level when your goal is to win the Pro Tour. That is just not available to those of us who are just like, my goal is to win the pre-release, right? Like we're playing a different game at some point, and it's because like I watch a lot of pro Magic. I mean, I know my show is casual Magic and I'm commander guy and everything, but like my real love is watching pro Magic and learning from people who are incredibly skilled at this game. And sometimes like you guys make picks that like I would see like a bomb rare that I would think is incredibly good and I would want to take that. And they're like, no, you've got to take this, utility common because the colors that common is in are going to be better for the grand draft as opposed to this individual pick or whatever. And that's the sort of stuff that is so hard for kind of like lower level players to wrap their heads around. But you're right, because like there's an issue of communication and of being able to like explain to someone, because presumably the people you're talking to are people who want to learn, right? Like they're people who want to get better. So there's less chance of you offending them by saying like, no, you did this wrong. This is why, or this is what you should have been doing. But like, how do you do that when like, you know, your teammates are people like Li Ten or Willie Edel, who's like, Hall of Famer, or all these people who are just incredibly good players. And like, isn't there some modicum of like, hey, I got to this level. I know what I'm doing.
Kind of, but in reality, I actually find it easier with the people who have been there a long time, like Lee and Willie, because
Mm,
they've heard it all. They've heard the
mm,
criticism. They're not
they're not new
afraid
to
to hear
this.
you're doing it wrong because they're trusting that if it's coming from that place, there's a rationale, there's a reason,
Sure.
and they're not afraid to fight back if they think I'm wrong or if they see a different. Like it's not a problem there.
Yeah.
And the main thing is really the attitude.
Mm,
It's because I've seen different teammates float by, and the main thing, right, is because I'll explain a bit of the approach, and
yeah.
it's important because I want to like long term kind of make that approach public, anyways. So might as well start with little nuggets of information. Um, we have access to two things that are really nice. One is there's a lot of public information. 17lands.com has like literally information on a
It's
ton of
almost
things.
too much information.
Yeah, so that's like I do a bunch of roles. One of them is like I'm a bad data analyst, but it's still better when nobody else is doing it, I guess. Um, and the second part is we have a lot of skilled players. So one of the issues in a lot of testing teams is communication.
Mm,
So what I strive for is how in the moments we're spending on limited, do you get the most out of it? Um, and a metric I like to use, which is a little technical, I guess, but it's like person drafts, right? So it's a very easy concept. It's I draft. Let's say you draft online on your own. That's
yeah.
one person draft. You drafted. You did the games, right? That's a unit essentially. I had
Okay.
a person draft. So if you draft with say 8 competent players in a pod, you could argue that's 8-person drafts, right? Like 8
Sure.
people. But that's not what happens when what you do. You stop, you re-put the decks back. You can do this online too, There are ways to do this online and get like the draft logs. You can do it obviously in paper. It's much more fun, anyways. But essentially, you lay the decks back out on the table, and then you kind of go through them, right? Like 2-3 minutes through it. More interesting decks, more time. Less interesting decks, less time. Just go like, what were your picks? What overperformed? What underperformed? Why? Context. What I would do, for example, is give context like, well, you explained this, but unfortunately, this is what's panning out. So it doesn't feel like that's accurate. Or, oh, actually, there's not a lot of information on this in this archetype. So we should like keep an eye out. Like basically try to give a learning point on the more complicated stuff, but essentially go around, right? So the thing is, when you do that, you go from 8 people drafted to a very powerful multiplicative effect, because each person is essentially, let's say I was seat 1, right? I get to see what seat 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drafted. So I get their experience. And then you realize that our team's 20 people. So even the people who are outside the draft learn what happened. So that's how we turn like one draft into the equivalent of 100 plus draft experiences.
Yeah, because
out of one draft.
I've seen those times when, like, somebody would be drafting on Magic Online, and then a whole bunch of other pros would be just, standing right behind them, just staring at every like move they take. Is that the sort of like kind of like when you're drafting in a testing house? Are you guys, if you've got 20 people in there, you're not just doing one draft and having everybody like bird while you're doing that, right? Like you guys are probably running multiple drafts and then breaking down after.
So it depends. Some people want to have birding, some people do on their own, but it's like the debrief at the end, everybody's there. It's like the Mingucci calls it like the sacred moment. Like no matter what else happens, come in, get the review, because that in 20 to 30 minutes is so much quality information that is almost impossible to replicate.
So what are you aiming to get out of that? So now you've got 8 drafts in front of you. Like, are you looking to try to see like, oh, you tanked the draft here by taking this one and thus ruining the 3 seats next to you? Or are you like saying, oh, hey, you were in a seat which was being fed these cards. Why did you take this one? Like, what is the general approach, or what are you looking for?
A little bit of everything. Alignment is one thing. You don't want everybody to draft exactly the same way, but you want everybody to have access to the same information on what's going on. Like,
sure.
Like, oh, I didn't know how to evaluate this. Well, it turns out this. Oh, I went into this for this reason. Sometimes it's I wanted to try, which is totally fine because we learned something. So as long as something was learned, it's important. I don't even mind. It's important even. This is where the honesty part comes in. The frankness of it is, if somebody says, I know this pick is wrong, but I wanted to try it to see what would happen, is a totally reasonable explanation because there was intent.
Right.
It's totally okay to say, we don't have information on this card. I wanted to try something around this and we learned something, is very useful. It doesn't always have to be the perfect pick, etc.
Right.
What were the lessons learned? Like, oh, for example, I took this, but then these things happened and it didn't work. But actually, had I done this and that, it might have. Right. It's because when you want to put people to learn as many unfamiliar situations as possible, to learn transformative situations, to look at archetypes that the data can't really easily capture. Sometimes you have archetypes that fall outside of 2 colors. Sometimes you have very specific
like it
common synergies or things that can happen that change things. So it's really about, like, the majority of it is a lot alignment. It's for people who don't feel comfortable in limited. They start understanding, right? So you listen, you're like, okay, so they picked that makes sense to me, but they picked this, so why is that? And then they can learn, right? The priority for me is learning while quashing ego. So if somebody voices too strongly, this is good, or there's a strong personal opinion, a lot of my role is to kind of calm the fort and go like, unfortunately, based on like what I saw, it doesn't appear to be this way. Like what you're saying doesn't seem to check out. I can be wrong on a few things, and that's fine. So like sometimes I'll be wrong, and then I'll go back and check, and then the next review I'll mention, by the way, I mentioned this, that was actually like, it's very important to research and align as you go, because you won't get it right the first time. It's about like improving as you go. And
you guys have done like multiple drafts before you even get to this point. So you know the general outline of what this format would look like.
So this is funny, right? One of the things, so there's 2 things that for me are funny about the process of this is, one, I think fundamentally our team per person probably does less drafts than a lot of the other top teams. Like I think numerically we do less, because we in the incentive for us is to do as high quality drafts as possible, so we do
Mm,
less that are higher quality, and we information share. The second thing that for me is funny is, um, I have a very strict policy about not talking about card evaluation until later in the process. So
mm,
like when people are like, "Oh, this was great," etc., I'm like, "Look, it's day 2. It doesn't matter. We're going to get new information in a week. We're going to get new context." So like the problem is card evaluation color things and create biases, and I have to eliminate biases. So what I actually say is, I want you to just play the game. I want you
mm.
to learn the mechanics of the set. Your pre-release is as good as your arena draft. It's as good as your MTGO league. It's fine. Whatever you do, I sealed with friends, casual. It doesn't matter. Learn what the set is, learn what the mechanics are, learn what the cards do. Everything else is irrelevant because we will go for that. So it's really funny that like the
Mm.
very start of the process is the same. Even if you're like a player that has started playing like 2 weeks ago, it's the same process. It's learn the cards,
Sure.
learn how it plays, like just discover. It's just like just do, I don't know, do a seal deck in a draft. That's fine by me if that's all you need. Like I'm pretty quick
Yeah.
learner and I research. Other people need 10. That's cool too. And the big thing for me is don't evaluate things, because I don't know, like the last set, Modern Horizons 3, I was getting Chrysalis pack 1 pick 8, like right, because it was the first draft. So like it's all irrelevant because that's not going to happen at the Pro Tour.
No, it sure is not.
Right. So why are you talking to me about card evaluations out of context?
One thing that's wild to me about like watching Pro Tour drafts is like the quality of decks are just so much worse than the quality of decks that you draft at like a store or whatever, because all the good cards are being taken by other people and you're not just being fed chrysalises.
Right. So you have to discover like what I call second tier cards, archetype specific tiered cards.
Right.
Okay, this is very good in this archetype. Discovery. One of the things I like to do a lot as well is information transformation over time. Like, okay, well, week 2, we see these effects. So
Hmm.
as a result of these effects, we should keep an eye on this. This is much more powerful than people think. Um, there's just a lot of this in limited. There's a lot of evolution and discovery that can be done day after day. And as well, doing the draft together, it's a pod draft, so we learn the dynamics, right? Like
Mm.
first drafts we did in Amsterdam, for example. Well, Drazi decks were winning, of course they were, because we weren't aligned 100%.
Right.
People knew they were good, and then as people started doing it, we started learning what the actual archetypes were in the set and the depth of it. I like MH3 a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think MX3 is super fun to play.
Yeah.
I played quite a bit of it. And I like that there was more to do than just Eldrazi.
Oh no,
And
no, there was a lot. Like it was, Blue Black got discovered. That was like the first step, but then it was a lot of considerations. Like some of the rares took time to be discovered, like
yeah,
Caphonian Nightmare and
God, I hate that
the
card.
Second Sun Enchantment. Like those were cards that started bad, went up over time. So and then Aether Revolt was another interesting card
Yeah,
because
dude.
we knew it was bad because people were putting in their Boros decks.
Mm.
And like Mars was saying was fun. I'm like, but the problem is you're much better than your opponents. So one of the things about like kind of putting the decks together is it neutralizes a lot of the personal advantages that people might have in limited. Because I think one of the challenges in testing for high level Magic is how do you separate the quality of player from the quality of the cards,
Mm.
while still analyzing how the cards perform at high level. That's really difficult.
That is exactly kind of the question I was driving at, which is at some point, like if you gave me and Reed Duke the same sealed pool, we are not going to come up with the same deck, right? Like he's going to do something that's just significantly better because he's got more experience and more understanding of what we're doing out of this format. But when you're sitting there at a testing team, like how do you take that into consideration? Like there's a tier of like, because you can hand the best cards to a bad player and they're going to get wrecked. You can hand a terrible pile to a very good player and they will find a way to eke out that margin. But when you're trying to test, that's not useful information.
Right, but that's where like sometimes the data comes in, right? That's
Mm.
where it can help like go like because something like Malevolent Rumble was like I think the top performing green like monocolored common in the set,
Mm.
and one person like I remember there's like a group of people that are like, oh, let's guess which commons would be best, and one person out of a large group even put Malevolent Rumble. Like there's a lot of counterintuitive cards, and Modern Limited is a lot about these counterintuitive cards. There's a lot of sets where the top commons are not what people might think. Like in Bloomburrow, the top commons are like carrot cake and cash grab.
You know what? I was playing carrot cake from the first day, and everybody's looking at me like, "Why are you putting that card in? It's garbage." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. This card rules."
But the reason it rules, right, is and I don't like Bloomburrow, as I said. It's awful. I like the sealed format, but the limited. I like it as a set for the art direction. I actually was very happy to get some singles.
The
from
flavor
the
and the art and everything is great. I think
Perfect.
the limited is less fun than I was hoping it would be.
No, the draft is the sealed is okay because in seal there's a lot of things. You power down the synergy, you power down the board presence, snow rolling. There's a lot of things that make the seal format a lot better. And people complain about rares from play boosters, but having more per person means that more people have a shot too. So it's not as bad as people think.
Literally before I talked to you, I was playing my last Bloomburrow draft, and I got wrecked by a guy who had 4 talents in play, the class enchantments. 2 of them were the green one that add the +1/+1 counter, and he had both of them to level 3. So he puts 1 counter on, and he gets like 6 counters out of it or whatever. And I'm just like,
there's nothing you can do because
what am
the average
my
card
1/2
is
is
so
not going to be your 9/11. That's not going to happen.
So the reason Cash Grab and Carrot Cake do well is that when you look at the set, the delta between the best cards and the worst cards is so high that anything that helps you dig towards those cards, overperforms. In MH Free, the reason Malevolent Rumble was good is different. It's because in that set, the best decks in limited were engine decks. So they're two very different reasons, right? So while Cash Grab and Malevolent Rumble look really similar, right? It's create a permanent, make a 4 cards, mill. They're both top, but why? And in Bloomburrow, it's because you have the you look at the top cards, and all the top cards are like rares and bombs. So and like you see the delta between drawing the card and not, and you realize, oh, these decks are full of trash and some good cards. So like the decks that go to their good cards do well. Very basic principle, but whereas in MH Free, people called it a synergy set, but it was a misunderstanding. It was an engine set. What you're trying to do is not have synergy. The synergy isn't built. What you're trying to do is have an engine. It's making the deck closer to an affinity deck, or
right.
So the people who are drafting energy were doing well. The people who were drafting like Malevolent Rumble to Crystal, like, if you had a specific rare like Nightmare, like I remember playing a sealed game and locked in the bag, all that, and then my opponent finally drew their Nightmare, and I was dead because they just got a Cursed Marauder, and there's nothing I could do. But they had a bunch of Rumbles to get into it, so they had well built their deck to get to that point as regularly and as synergistically as possible. And when my drafts were doing well, it was the same thing. It's like, how do I get my thing to do the same thing as regularly and as powerfully as I can do it? So there, it's 2 different reasons. In Rumble, I'm not looking for a specific card. I'm looking to make my deck hum. But with Cash Grab, I am looking for a specific card because my, Warren Leader or Camilla or whatever is just so much better than all the rest of the trash that we have access to. That is what helps me get ahead, right? So that's the and I think that gives you an inkling as to the limited preparation too, is why. Because when you go out of context, you need to understand why. You need to understand why it is that this is powerful, why we're going this way, and why this is not, because that's what leads to discovery. Sometimes because we were doing well with decks in MH3 that were weird. Like the deck I freoed at the house was like, do you know like the Tamio Saga, like 1 blue, discard cards, investigate, like terrible statistics, right?
It did not look good.
No, but like I had it with
Tamio meets a story circle.
Yeah, exactly. And I had it with Victimize, which is also terrible, and Kappa Cannoneer. And that performed well, right? Was this understanding of, okay, so I saw this Tamio in my pack meets the story circle, and I know the Kappa Cannoneer is coming back. And I know, and like my deck wasn't good, but what I realized was I can be in this Esper strategy that is essentially filtering my deck out of lands because I have a lot of fetch lands, because remember, we're at a top level pod, all the good cards are gone, there's nothing. So I realized like, oh, I can do this deck that cycles through, right? Like either the land cycles or it searches through and it just builds the fences. And then eventually I'm drawing more spells than lands. And then that helps me get to the point where I can have my A plus B piece of synergy, because I'm playing as an engine deck. But if I didn't have kind of those lands that were getting me there, like, and it was a weird draft, and I was wondering why that draft performed. And then I like looked at other decks, and I was like, when these decks are engine decks, and it didn't matter what terrible engine it was, the engine decks were outperforming normal / synergy decks.
Hmm.
because they were doing the thing they were supposed to do as consistently as
Can
possible.
you define what you mean by engine deck versus synergy deck?
Sure. So like a synergy deck would be like I'm going to try to think of examples from Commander or Constructed because I think that might be helpful. So a synergy deck is let's see. I guess it's the difference. Like for me, Oracle of Moldiah would be like an engine card. It's
Hmm.
allowing you to always draw spells.
Sure.
You're always going to be playing spells over time.
Right.
Like Oracle of Moldiah, I think that's kind of a popular card.
Yeah.
A long time. Whereas a synergy card would be like, uh, A plus B or
Yeah, like the modules or the like affinity cards or something like that, or
I don't know, like a Squirrel Lord and a
yeah,
Squirrel.
like the
That would be like,
squirrels.
yeah,
Exactly.
like the difference is I get Lords are a good example actually. The difference would be like the difference between Elvish Archdruid and Imperious Perfect.
Mm,
Elvish Archdruid is an engine, Imperious Perfect is a synergy card / army and a camp. Like
sure.
there's
That's different.
context for each of them. Like in a format with more removal and more ways to break down stuff, like in Bloomburrow, the standalone synergies are better because you're only going to usually have access to 2 pieces or 3 pieces. Whereas in MH free, where like yes, there is good removal, but like there's a lot of ways to recur things. You're starting to go into the engine territory because your pieces interlock and come
Right.
back and are resilient. So like Sneaky Snacker is a great engine card.
Mm,
Once you get there, it sticks. There's not much that your opponent can do to remove your engine. So yes, it's synergy in the sense of I draw cards and I make my Sneaky Snacker come back, but it's actually an engine because I'm digging cards, which helps me get there. And once I get there, I get to lock up the game because I have this consistent kind of pressure / defense.
man, Sneaky Snacker is one of those cards that I thought was a very skill testing card because you could tell the level of a player by what they thought about that card. Because I looked at that, I'm like, draw 3. How am I going to draw 3 cards in any turn, right? And then it's like, oh, this card is actually busted.
Yeah, once you know what's going on, it makes sense. But then you're starting to make counterintuitive picks. Like you're like, oh, Eviscerator's insight's a lot more powerful than I.
Right.
And and this is in the Curse Marauder because it comes back. Like there's a lot of things that change once you have an understanding. And I think part of why we did well at that PT specifically limited is that
Mm,
identification that what am I trying to accomplish that is consistent and powerful. And we re-ranked archetypes based on that. So like so while I top aided the PDQ, I didn't do well. And one of but I did well in my other drafts. But one of the differences was in the other drafts, I was seeking how to make my engine work.
mm,
Whereas in that one, I made a mistake, which was I was correct to be in the black seat, but it was like leaning red black. Like I had some refurbished familiars and
sure.
artifacts, right? The mistake I made was that red black in MH3 is a good archetype, but it's a lot more synergy than engine.
Mm,
So the problem with that is that unless your whole deck is engineered towards it, like literally almost everything artifacts going towards that goal, you start being in trouble.
right.
And I should have identified that in a single elimination pod. Yes, it's fine to be in black. The color is great for a lot of reasons, but I should have been black red / black blue because
Mm,
even though I'd abandoned a lot of good black red cards from pack 1, I can pivot because the black blue archetype is that deep. And because I didn't do that, right, I didn't do well. I,
mm.
faced a bad match, et cetera, et cetera. But like the other drafts, for example, I drafted a green black deck with like Nevergoyf and Malevolent Rumble. And those 2 cards work really well together.
Yeah,
I can
they
tell you.
really, really do.
At the Arena Open, I literally went Goyf 1 and Rumble 2, and my opponent just exploded.
Oh, geez.
Didn't want to talk
Oh,
to be
that's
honest. And
gross.
Nevergoyf didn't have good statistics, right? So
No,
like I'm a data-vor person in limited. Like I analyze, I look at the statistics, etc. And I think a lot of people should that don't that really should, but there are always exceptions. And once you understand how it forms, it's basically use the statistics to inform
mm,
power level of evaluation cards. I think people should stop going, "What's my pick 1 pack 1?" It's very entertaining, but it's
yes.
not useful.
No.
I'm sorry. It's what's useful is what's my pick 1 pack 5.
Right. That's exactly. Thank you. Thank you. I've been trying to say that for a long time because, like, your first pick is just a pick and avoid, whatever. Take the card you like. The pick that matters is the one that actually makes your deck work when it's like pack 8 or pick 8 and like pack 2 or something like that. When you're like, how is this pile actually going to win? Like those are the picks that I care about, which is like the deep side of I've got like my framework. What do I fill it in with? How do I actually make this thing do something?
Yeah, how do I fill my curve? What am I looking for? What are early
That's
on,
I
like
feel like
how
that's
am I
where your deck can
branching?
go off the rails the most in like
Yeah.
the mid packs when you're just like, oh, I don't know what I'm even taking or what. Like for instance, you can tell like you're like, oh, my pack one, I picked a black card, and then like you don't get any black cards for the next 4 cards, so you're like, okay, well, I'll go into red or something. Suddenly, black cards come flooding back, and you're like, wait, should I be in black or should I be in? And that's where I guess the skill of the player and just doing the reps over and over again comes from.
Yeah, and the information, but it's not just your reps; it's the reps of the rest of the team. We're a team; we should work as a team. And
Hmm.
I think too many people have this nostalgic view of the individual who's doing well, and no, we're a community of people getting information online for free. By the way, everybody gets access to the same information. That's great. In an era where a lot of things are not free and you have to log in and all this other stuff, I'm pretty happy about that. And then on the
Yeah.
other side, you have, we're literally a group of people in the same room or in the same online room or physical room. Why would we draft alone? Why wouldn't we use the fact that we have a bunch of people who care, who want to do better and do things together? And I think that's what differentiates our perspective in limited. And I think that's why we're not doing well in constructed is we want to emulate the same thing, but we haven't done it as well in constructed.
Hmm.
So that for me is the key difference is um I think the constructed has actually gone so bad that they're willing to try something very different for the next tournament. So that's actually really exciting. But it's because they've seen and limited the perspective of doing things together. And to be honest with you, the perspective of like essentially, I talked to somebody. She said it was like the Think a Lot protocol,
Hmm.
um, and like where you put the cards around the table and like you discuss. That was actually it might have been developed earlier, but one of the teams I remember back in my heyday at the Pro Tour was team. I think it was Eureka, and they developed that, and they were doing much better limited back when there was no data because they were sharing information,
Hmm.
and they were doing so in a way that was comprehensive and building people up. And when we were on min card, we copied that. The first time we did it wasn't good. Subsequent Pro Tours, we did okay. We did great
Yeah.
because we were using the communication share and
So why do
sharing
you
that
think that
information.
works in limited but not in constructed?
So I think it works in constructed. I just don't think we're good at sharing that information. It's because like in constructed, right? Like having 2 people play and 4 people watch is not that great. I also think that playing games of Magic has a hard limited on like in limited there's a limit on how many games you play. That also helps.
Hmm.
Constructed, you should be going for patterns, pattern recognition, and position analysis, and those are very different criteria than games of limited. And also in games of limited the record isn't as important because you can justify a 2-1 or 1-2 record in a million ways. In constructed, people like look at game results too much because you play just enough to look good. No, it's not. I mean, I guess I can recognize the problems. I'd wish I could offer the solution as a result, but whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you knew that, then we would be having a very different conversation, right? Like, it because I think there's something about limited that just makes it easier to approach from a information sharing because like all the decks are on the table, all the cards that you opened are right there. We know what the meta is. There's no like weird outliers or anything like that. And constructed decks, yeah, there's like maybe 6 or something that are like top tier constructed decks that matter, but it feels like there's just more potential for weird variables and different experiences to make it less easy to just unify, understand. Like you can like we can all sit there and look at a draft and go like, oh, blue and Bloomburrow sucks, right? Or but it's a lot harder to do that with constructed because what matches did you play? Who did you play against? Maybe this deck works really good against that one, but not against a person. Maybe you just have bad. I don't know.
It's also in constructed you can learn a lot on your own,
Mm,
or with a smaller group, and we benefit in limited from a high willingness to share, and to be honest, a culture of sharing.
yeah.
Newcomers are taught very quickly that doing drafts if so we exclude learning drafts. So if you're just playing to learn, doing a seal deck at the pre-release, playing online, it's not the end of the world if you don't share a draft. Like the learning is the learning. That's on you do you learn. If you want help, ask, but like otherwise learn. Once you're at the stage of I want to share, I want to discuss the format, we have very strictish policies on no, you're sharing information. So like if I don't have your draft log, I'm not going to be able to help you. Like we've had like, newer players who are like, here's my deck, how should I build it? I'm like, what was your draft log? What did you do? I want to know where your picks were. I want to know how the cards perform. And it's not just me, it's other like kind of people have been in the team in a while, and we have this culture of get used to it. Like we allow, people will make the mistake because the first time they do it, it's not recorded. There's a lot, you didn't press the button or whatever. So it's very important to get that culture in, because the sooner they see that culture, the more they get into this habit of, oh, I should be learning from listening and I should be sharing. And learning from listening is super important. Like listening is not a skill a lot of people have. Like, well, I mean, I can see it, by the way. Like, so like when we have newcomers in the team, and I'm comparing it even to experienced players, the people who listen tend to be the ones who perform the best. And I can see it, because I'm not proud of this quote, by the way. But, we did a limited meeting for Lord of the Rings, and one person didn't attend the meeting. I went 0-3. I'm like, okay, the one person who didn't attend didn't do well. But, that shouldn't be a point of pride or whatever. There's 20 people. I'm not, there's a limit to how responsible for each
well,
person.
I mean, yeah, it's like, look, dude, if you're not going to do the homework, you're not going to pass a test. That's just.
But the people who did the homework did well.
Right.
There are people who like typically at Pro Tours did well and constructed, but the limit always fell. They were like, oh, I didn't do well in limited, and they didn't know why. So like the opportunity for them to go like, oh, I can learn, and they trust enough of the players on our team that are very good limited players to gives them confidence, right? And then they learn how to do it. They see the methodology, and then they take notes, they learn, they ask questions. And then when like, performance day comes, they do well because they realize it's not necessarily that hard, but they haven't had that perspective of information sharing. There's a lot of doing things on your own. There's a lot of discovery on your own. And we're people, we're a group. Like, honestly, the best, like, it's the same lesson I learned when I was 15 years old. And trust me, I'm not 15 now. Which is that I only got better because I was playing with players who were driven. And it's okay if they're better.
You're in the wrong room.
Yeah, and it's okay if they're like better or worse. That's not actually that as important as people think. Like people are like, surround yourself with people who are better than you. I'm like, that's not quite 100%, but like people who have the passion want to learn together. And unfortunately, one of my best friends unfortunately passed away. But back then, we were both driven. Like us together, we were learning together. Like he would do well, I would do well. We'd share, we'd spend time together. Later on, I learned that was the thing. Like then it was local game stores for me that like had a tighter knit community. That was like some of the players were going to the Pro Tour, so we were learning. They were coming back. We were learning. Some others went. A little bit of a cycle. And it's important to share the information. And something I learned, early on, I was a learner, right? I'm the person who learned from others, who got taught, etc. And I had to get, some of the arrogance beaten out, which is normal. But then over time, I was, you become the teacher. But it's so it's super important to value people outside of their play skill, because what matters is, and I'm going to sound like a horrible manager here, but you can't teach passion and motivate. If people are passionate and care, they will strive to learn. And people who in our team you would not identify as the top limited players did very well because they learned. They wanted to learn. They wanted to get better. They were willing to listen. And that ability to listen is so important.
Ultimately, the goal here is that you have to be willing to set aside your own ego, set aside your own knowledge, and say like, hey, maybe I don't know the best. Maybe I do know the best, but maybe I don't. Let me at least see what they have to say, and let me see if there's something I can learn from this. Because otherwise, you're just going to get trapped in your own path that you keep walking over and over again. Because you're like, why is this going wrong? I keep doing the same thing, and the same thing just running me into the wall every time. It's like, well, your track is running directly into a wall. Maybe move. But if you don't listen to somebody, then if you don't have an outside, like, I find that's when I'm doing my deck building and stuff, I find it very useful for me to give my deck to another friend and say, like, hey, look at this and give me your thoughts on it. And we can sit and collaborate and go back and forth, and I can understand where I missed or what synergies I missed out on or what cards I should be playing to do the thing that I'm intending to do that I wouldn't see because I've been tunnel visioned on the one thing I've been doing and unable to see from outside what I'm trying to do. I mean, it's the same way with like writing or really anything you do in
And
life.
anything. It's
Yeah.
honestly, it's just good life advice in
Yeah.
general.
It's like,
Just take the time to,
don't
spend
think
the
that you know it
time.
all.
Yeah, but it's also like, choose people who don't have that ego or are willing to set it aside. There are people who have that ego and that's a battle they have, but at the same time, they're willing to set it aside from time to time. And that are willing to learn / teach. As long as like it's fair, right? As long as like, okay, I listen and we move on. And then like the next step is like, okay, we've gone up a step, right? There's progression at some point. The and the thing for me with the ego, right, is like it's something that as time goes on, it becomes more important to go like, yes, it's good to celebrate successes, but we got here because we're working together. If we don't work together, that success isn't coming back. And sometimes it doesn't come back because variance or we didn't understand the set or we got it. Like, it's not impossible, right? Like the last 3 Pro Tours, OTJ didn't go that well. We had less information. The communicate standard was a heavier focus. So there was a lot of kind of mixed signals on it. So we did okay, but like not like compared to MKM and MH3, where I think our average draft record was very close to 2-1 at the pro. Like the average
crazy.
And we're talking about a large group. We're talking about like 12 to 20 people here. Like, so
that's
this isn't like
so many
small.
God, that's ridiculous.
But the MKM Pro Tour, the Murders of Carlo Mana was a good one because with play boosters with the card list, something that became apparent to me is what was mattering more wasn't just picking the right cards. It was not making the mistake of picking the wrong cards. Especially in MH3 with the 10 fetch lands at common.
Yeah.
Your packs are dry, fundamentally. So, like, just getting the playable count's hard. So like you have to fill it up, and when you're filling it up with cards that are awful, you're in so much trouble. Like, and you can see the reverse effect on 17 lands. Yes, when you draw this top card, it's this, but then look at the bottom ones too, because that's what happens when you like I saw like decks from that Pro Tour on X at the time, or Twitter, whatever. And people were like, "Oh, I went 1-2. I thought my deck was fun." And every time I looked at a 1-2 deck, I was like, "I can identify 4 or 5 cards you probably took over something you shouldn't have." and it was, one of my friend's acquaintances. I like the guy. In Canada, was asking me about limited. He was like asking me if I could give him advice. I was like, "Look, I can answer your questions, but I can't. I'm teaching another team for limited. I can't like this." But
yeah, sure.
But he was, I showed some seal decks, but he asked me a question that would have been relevant in draft, which was, why are you playing? It was Offender at Large, the 5/4 that boosts +2/+0 disguise, rather than deal 4 for 5 mana or 2 mana if you sacrificed an artifact. And my answer was maybe a little harsh, but it was, if you're asking me that question, it means that you might have fundamentally misunderstood what's going on, and you should stop drafting and start learning what's going on. Which is really hard. It was the truth.
That is very mean to say, but it's also true at some point. It's like
I try to do it in a way that wasn't rude, and the guy was also quite tough-skinned, so it was fine. But it was more in the context of the problem is, it's not a card evaluation problem, because you could go on like 17 lands, check both cards, and see. The problem is, if you're asking me that question, it means that you don't understand what the format's about. So you need to understand what the format's about first. The format's not complicated. It's make your land drops, attack, and play a trick to deal lethal. It's very one of the easiest. I hated that set. We did very well, but I hated it. It's because it took me one draft to figure it out. Because I had a deck. Fun. I had free lightning helixes that I did poorly. I was like, why am I not having? What is going on here? And then I learned, what matters the most is I need to make my third land drop. And anytime I don't make that third land drop, it doesn't matter how good I am, I can't win. So because of how that set was designed, so it was like you have to play 18 lands, or the 2-1 that surveils 1, which normally is awful, but in that set was great. Or good enough. Like there's a bunch of things like that, which are cards that like help your deck get to your 18th mana. Right. I think third mana is so critical.
There's an interesting fundamental right there, which is the idea of like, if you don't understand the baseline of the set, then no amount of extra help is going to help you. get out of there. Like, because like there's some points where it's definitely been like I'm looking at a limited format and I'm trying to figure out why is just this not working for me, and it turns out because I've just grossly misunderstood what the cards do, or rather what the like the speed of the format, or what like the fundamental core of what mechanics do anything. And that's when you sit there and go like, huh, you picked a weird card. Why did you do that? Well, if I knew the set, then I would know why you picked that card. And then we can talk about the nuance. But if I don't have that baseline understanding, it's like walking into like, the fourth year of a language class and not knowing how to read the alphabet, right? It's like,
It's you need to know your alphabet before you know the rest, right? It's
right.
hard to have a deeper conversation. And that's where like sharing the knowledge helps,
Mm,
is no one is completely left unguarded.
right. You want to
It's
build that
almost like
fundamental
no
evidence.
man left behind, so to speak. It's like
Right.
no one's left at sea to drown. That's a very important part of the process. It's not just we're teaching you to be at a high level. It's if you were struggling, we will make sure you don't struggle
Mm,
by the end of this process. So, because doing well isn't just making sure the top players are at the top, it's also making sure that nobody's drowning.
right. Like you want to bring the median up, right? You don't want to just have like, oh yeah, our best players are going to go through, because like the other people are still on your team. You want them to succeed. When you all succeed, it's good for everybody. But relatedly, I was wondering if I could tag that into an idea of like, what is it like in a testing house, or like when you're doing testing for Approachware and your team is globally spread? You've got people in Hong Kong and Australia and Belgium and everywhere. That is a very disparate group. How do you bring this together to be able to get any cohesive testing at all?
It's,
Like,
I mean,
what
it's a
happens in
challenge we
those
always
rooms?
have. I don't think we've solved it, because I think that's because honestly, I think worldwide that's a tough problem in so many
Fair.
areas. Um, I guess in the context, things that are important, lack of ego slash respect. So like, okay, you got to this level too. I will respect and value your opinion. Very important. Um, the fact that like English is second language to most means that you need to leave time for people to be able to speak up,
Hmm.
because clearly like I'll have much more confidence in English than a lot of people on our team. So one of the things I try to be adamant on is let's listen to this person now. Like give them time. They might be quieter, they might have trouble expressing. Sometimes I'll help add or translate or go like, okay, so you said this. Do you mean this, or do you mean that? Like, make sure that like communication is smooth. Very important. One of the advantages with time zones though is it's testing around the clock online. So like, a group like from Europe might go like come to some conclusion and go like, oh, but we're not sure about this.
Hmm.
Okay. Then the group from like APAC will try it over, and then like you wake up and like, oh yeah, okay, well, okay, that's a lesson. And then the next group tries. So you get that advantage. Um, some of the disadvantages are because not everybody's on the same time zone. You don't get as much of a buzz. It's like harder for morale
Hmm.
digitally. A house physically helps a lot in that sense, because like you have smaller groups that have to help each other,
Right.
which is a obviously much more difficult proposition than a bunch of people
Right.
kind of in the same
So I'm going to
vibing
ask a
room.
very stupid baseline question. Like when you guys go to these testing houses, do you just come in with like crates of cards?
Oh yeah. Like every we logistically, yeesh. Zen's been awesome on this stuff. Like we make sure that like the stuff that's accommodation, etc., all that stuff is like taken care of. Everybody has the information. There's almost like a semi information packet, so to speak, in Discord. There's logistics, like who's bringing what. We need
Hmm.
basic land, like make sure that like, okay, we need basic lands, we need booster boxes, we need these decks.
Sure.
Make sure that enough of each deck is available, and then like if it's not, like do a count out, like, oh, we're missing a copy of this. If you don't have it, make sure that like proxies are there, etc. Like
Yeah.
it's just like there's a lot of communication on once we arrive, we do, that things are well. And it depends per testing house. Sometimes the group is larger, sometimes we have newer people, sometimes the vibe's good, sometimes the vibe's less. It just varies, right? um Logistics, the nice part is about having a nice large diverse internationally group of things is some people know how to cook, some people know how to like during groceries, they know how to identify things, some people know how to keep things organized, some people
Mm,
are better at communicating and speaking with the group. Some people are better tinkers on their own, but like they work around they might be on their own, but they're actually very valuable because they're doing very specific tasks on their own. They're like, oh, okay, they identify something that everybody needs, do it and come back. Like, so and then, I mean, it's a large group. Some people don't
Yeah.
pull their weight. That happens. Whatever.
I mean,
I wish I could say it's like lovey-dovey and everything.
I mean,
Sometimes
that's
that
every
happens.
company, right? Like that's at some point when your group is sufficiently large enough, there's going to be people who are also there.
And what I like to call it is you have to account for what I like to call the testosterone effect. I've been in enough groups of houses with so like, I guess we're diverse culturally, right? But a lot of men.
Yeah.
And I've been in those groups, and I know that sometimes people will, just need to blow off steam, and people
Yeah.
are like, why are they in this state or something? I'm like,
Just let them
I've
it's
seen
fine.
it. I've seen it before. Let them blow off steam in their way. They're just off for the day. It's just like the main thing is to not cause damage.
Right.
That's the priority for me, is the in the team is one of the things that we close out on, aka like we either don't invite in, or if we did invite in, next time it doesn't happen, is somebody who damages the group self, like other people in the group, disrespect others, create tension beyond what needs to be created. Very important that it comes from that level of respect. It's also, if somebody doesn't understand that people behave differently, have different ways of seeing things, then they kind of have to go if they're causing damage, right? If they're saying like, oh, um, and it's normal, because you can't have that. Like, it's also like, Magic's fun. You want to have a little bit of a vacation. It makes sense, right? We're not, no, let's be honest, none of us are professionals. It's a dirty secret. We're not professionals. So you want to have fun, and it's not very enjoyable to have a bad atmosphere.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to fly halfway around the world to go into a house with people you like and then just hating the next 2 weeks because it's just miserable all the time. Like, that's not a good experience. And you're not going to win, obviously, because of that. You're going to come out of it being like, that sucked. Did I learn anything, or did they just like beat me up for being terrible?
Yeah, no, and there's different vibes, and
Yeah. But I mean, the part of being on a team, though, is also learning how to mitigate that and not being a dick all the time, right? Like, there's some tier of like, hey, you know what? You got to work with these other people. Yeah, if you're angry with them, fight it out on the playfield tomorrow. But today, let's be friends and not try to just like.
It's also where it's useful to have things like a football field, a pool, like whatever it is
Some
that
other
people,
like Street Fighter.
I mean, yeah, it depends. Like, I don't think many people in the group are into fighting games, unfortunately. Like, I'm more into, obviously with this background, I'm clearly more into video games.
Yeah, I see that you and I share a lot of passions.
Yes, but I mean, there's a whole thing. But the big thing is, I've literally been around the block enough. The big thing is the big questions, right? Are you just fed up for a moment? That's fine. Things can happen, blow off steam. Or was there something really darker at stake? Like, you're not respecting others. You're not giving, you're cutting others' voices a lot. You're creating a disturbance of information that isn't helping. Like, sure, you might have trouble helping out because you need to be shown or whatever, but like, if you are shown and you don't do it, then it's kind of like longer term problems. We've been okay actually at avoiding, I think, the kind of inviting that kind of behavior in the first place. So we've had some incidents, but nothing too horrible and nothing that couldn't be managed. But
right.
Super important. It's important, right? Different cultures also see things differently. Like, things that might be acceptable in one culture on another, and it's fine if you're an international group, but like, the question is like, are you imposing on somebody else or not?
Like, it's fine to sit there and just, like, knock each other around and like tell people, oh no, you're not doing good or whatever. Like, you can have internal just like ball busting with each other or whatever, but the importance is the intent behind it. And like, are we doing this because we're trying to get better at this? Are we doing this because it's our communication style, or are you just doing this to knock me down for no good reason? And like, you can tell the difference. Like, if you've been around for long enough, if you've talked to enough people, you can see when somebody is like, hey, I'm criticizing you because there's information you're missing, or there's something we can do to make you better at this, or I'm just belittling you for no good reason. And like that's just, I mean, that's team dynamics. That's like being a good people person, being a good team player. And if you're not a good team player, you shouldn't be on a team. Like,
Yeah, and there's a level of responsibility that's important, because sometimes I have to tell people they're wrong, and sometimes I'm wrong while telling them that. So there, you know,
yes.
but the big thing for me is the responsibility to the group, because I do it on the side, right? I'm not like qualified, so I'm very much the external person who's has to help the group. So if for me the big thing is if 20 people are listening in, right? I need to make sure that the message that comes out is something that is digestible, understandable, and correct and correct is not the right way to look at it, but it's more like we understand the direction. So it's okay if we disagree on a specific thing if there is a build around, but I don't want somebody to learn the wrong thing because it's very hard to unteach. Like
Right.
teaching with people who are willing is good, but unlearning is a horrible process. Like like that's something we try to do online before you join. Like, okay, we're going to teach you a new method, because people are primed to learn something new when you're like joining a new group. But
Right.
like unteaching someone something is so much work. It's
Yes.
very difficult.
Unlearning bad habits is one of the most miserable. Yeah, I mean, in any practice, not just in like this, but like it, teaching somebody how to breathe right in meditation, for instance, or like teaching someone how to sharpen a knife when you're cooking or working in a chef. It's like if you started with a bad habit that's becoming ingrained to a habitual behavior, you're
You're
screwed.
you're you're right. And like one of the things I remember, meditation is a funny example, because my brother brought me to somewhere when we were going in Japan with my family. It
Hmm.
was like a trip my mom really wanted to do, so we did it. It was nice. Um, my brother brought us all to meditation class, which I think for my mom was kind of funny. Um, but one of the key things I remember from that teacher was excellent, because one of the reasons I thought that he was excellent was, people had different skill set. I was a novice. Um, was that there were people in the lotus position,
Hmm.
and he was asking them, why are you in the lotus position? And like, oh, because this is how it's supposed to be done. And they're like, what do you mean? Wait, what? So he was like,
Challenging your assumptions.
he wasn't. So it was interesting because he wasn't just challenging their assumption. It was a larger group, right? It wasn't just 4 people. There were like 20, 30 people. And something
Mm,
I learned from that was he said, you need to put yourself in a position where your body is not disrupting your mind,
mm,
basically, so to speak, right?
right.
So I was like in mermaid because for some reason I like that stance. And I had a great session. Like I felt emotions I hadn't felt in a while, a lot of joy, and etc.
Sure.
But the part for me that I learned a lot from that teaching was it wasn't about putting these people down. He did it in a way which was, it's okay. You've been taught in a certain way, but think about why you're doing this.
Hmm.
If you have an answer for me that's not just we were shown and that's it,
Hmm.
then it's fine. Like we had a discussion, but like otherwise, you need to reconsider what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
Making an
that's the kind,
assumption here. And
right.
let's,
And that's the approach I try to do is more the why are we doing this, right? Like
yeah.
why, I don't know, like we had a draft, why did you pass toxic deluge pick 4 pack 1? I want answers. And then at some point you go like, okay, that makes sense, but this doesn't. And then you break it down with them, like going like, okay, but like if you had done it here, it's not just the pick, right? If you had done it, this is the direction you would have gone down under, and this is where it would have led. So it's not just you made a mistake. It's like,
Mhm.
this is the direction it might have led down because this would have happened as a result.
Hmm.
So it's about teaching the why, the importance of what you've learned from it, what we've all learned. And then remember, everybody's listening in. So it's a lot of people being taught at once. So it's not about putting that person down like, oh, you made a mistake. That's not what matters. What matters is this is why it might have been incorrect. This is what it led to.
Hmm.
And these are the consequences for you. But this is what happened in the rest of the table. And this
Hmm.
is how it modified. So 20 people get that information. That's unbelievably valuable.
Yeah. Have you ever tried? I mean, have you ever done something where you're trying to unwind the draft to see where it went off the rails, or try to figure out what might have happened if they had picked a different card?
That's constant. Like but like we don't do it necessarily with the cards, but like, because you can visualize it because the decks
Right.
are there. But yeah, it's constant. That's regular, especially the first couple of drafts we do. It's almost always the case.
Hmm.
Later on, people are more aligned, and the decks all look like, one of the things we know if we're succeeding is the pick order quality hasn't gone down, but the decks have gotten better. That's a really big measure of success for me, is like everybody at this table has functional decks, even though nobody's given cards for free. That's super important. That's like, okay, everybody's starting to understand what's going on. You're finding your paces, you're finding your seat, no matter what the context is. That's because you're right. Like at the Pro Tour, you're not getting great cards all the time. So the question is, what did you do? And if everybody at the table managed with like the second tier ingredients, so to speak, then that's a really good sign.
Man, this has been a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really, really cool. I love this sort of thing, and I really appreciate you sharing with me. If folks wanted to find you or anything like that, where could they go?
That's a good question, because I don't hang out on Twitter.
You don't hang out online anymore. I know.
Well, I hang out online a lot. So
I had to track you down in person, man.
Yeah, so you can find me in person at some Magic Cons, but I think I'm a big believer in accessibility. Yeah, I guess
that's just like tell people your Twitter handle.
Yeah. So Wala Oompa, WALAOUMPA. That's one way. You can always message me. I'm also on Discord. That's a really good way to get in touch. You could also email me at firstname.lastname@gmail.com.
Sure.
The usual. Like I'm always happy for kind of conversations about how you can move forward. If you have, for example, one of the conversations I have a lot with people is, we have a group of people who are motivated, but we're having trouble. We're struggling, like working together. I'm more than happy to help you on that stuff too. Because somebody Michael Jacob voiced this the other day, and I really like the way he voiced it, so I'll just copy it. So sorry. But it's, I want to give back to the community that has given me so much. He did it in the context of streaming. And for me, it's more in the context of theory and in spending time with people who want to spend time with each other, right? Because if your goal is to be with others and improve the way you are with others, then to me, that's an amazing life goal. Forget magic. It's just great. So I want to spend time with you on that. I have no problem spending time with you on these things, because for me, that's always something worth going for, pursuing, supporting. But yeah, so Wala Oompa is my online handle, Eduardo Sajgalik name, and if you can usually find some way of contacting me, email.
Can I ask you, what ethnic culture does your name come from?
Oh, sure. Oh, the surname is Slovak.
Cool.
So funny story. The two funny things about my nationalities. I have a nationality. The nationality of the country I was born in is one neither of my parents have. And at one point in my life, I was eligible for 6.
Eligible for 6 different nationalities?
Didn't have 6. That's not possible.
I'm just imagining you pulling out like a passport full of passports.
Just like, oh, which one? No, it was like, it's because like my dad's Slovak, grew up in Peru before immigrating to Canada. My mom was Spanish, bunch of countries before going there too. But like now they live back in France and Spain, and like and I lived in the UK. So, these days I live more in Montreal. I just honestly love it here. I came here years ago. I got a place because I just foresee my future here. I just, cool. I'll live here with my wall of stuff.
Man, Montreal is one of the cities in North America I haven't gotten to go yet, and I'm very excited to make it there someday, just because the architecture and the food is incredible, and I just want to try a Montreal bagel really, really badly.
Oh yeah, we where I live nearby a lot of the good bagel places, so I should do that. I get it at well, I get them. They're good, but they're not like that level of quality. I need to get like some of the fresher bagels.
Well, it's just they're fundamentally different from what we're used to in the States, so it's novelty. But in any case, thank you again for joining me. This has been a delightful chat. I really learned a lot, and I didn't know where it was going to go, but I was really this was rad. I really like this one, actually. This is really cool.
No, I'm glad you liked it too, and I quite happy about it.
No, that's awesome. But yeah, with that, my friend, as always, you can find me at Gear Upward Gears. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at YouTube every Tuesday, thanks to my editor, Dan. And you can also hear me on Shivam Wheeler Love Magic and on the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast. And as always, my friends, remember, it's not magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.